this lesson is going to be about the cell membrane and transport across the cell membrane. So the plasma membrane functions to protect the cell from its surroundings, and it does this because it is selectively permeable, which means that it can regulate the transport of molecules in and out of the cell in order to maintain homeostasis. So basically, it can control the passage of things, so some things will pass, others won't, is what it comes down to. And it will control that. And so the plasma membrane is made up of a bunch of phospholipids, which are drawn here, and we can see that the phospholipids, they have this polar head, which is hydrophilic, which means water-loving. And then it's also made up of the nonpolar tail portion, which is hydrophobic, which is like water-hating, I guess we'll say. And so, based on this, it aligns itself appropriately so that the polar head portion is on the water side, or the aqueous side, and then the nonpolar side would be kept away from water. And so it arranges itself into what we call a phospholipid bilayer. And so if we just draw what this would look like, we have all of our polar heads, and then we have the nonpolar tails. And so we can see that it's going to arrange itself this way so that we can say this is the outside of the cell. So it's aqueous because we have the polar heads out here. And then this side in here is going to be the inside of the cell, which is also aqueous because we have the polar heads on that side. And so the inside has no water. It is not allowed in this portion. And so some other things that we'll see in the phospholipid bilayer are going to be big things like this, which we'll just draw some more of the membrane over here. But this would be like a transport protein. And this is how some things are able to get across from the inside to the outside of the cell. So we're regulating, the transport of things across. One of the ways is through these transport proteins. And another thing that we can find within the phospholipid bilayer is cholesterol. These would just be like a little molecule added in. That structure is going to provide stability for the cell, or for the plasma membrane. So that's just another thing that can be in there as well. And so we can also, if we remember that many have a cell wall that goes around this membrane. Not animals. Animals don't have a cell wall, so that's just another thing. This is not the cell wall, this is the cell membrane, and the cell wall will be around it. And so some of the ways that things are transported across, like we said that transport protein earlier, is through passive transport, which does not require energy because it's following the concentration gradient from like a high concentration to a low concentration. So it's just going with the flow. No energy is required. And so one way of passive diffusion, or passive transport, is through diffusion, which just goes directly through the membrane. So in our diagram up above, it wouldn't need to go through that transport channel. It would just go in between the polar heads and then slip right on through, just through the membrane. Facilitated diffusion, on the other hand, uses those protein channels. So this is for things that aren't able to just slip through the membrane. An example of this would be osmosis, water traveling through. Water uses aquaporins, which is just the special name for the specific transport proteins that water uses. Because obviously, if the center where all these nonpolar tails are is hydrophobic, so it doesn't like water, a water molecule can't pass through there because the tails won't allow it. So that's why it needs to use the aquaporin to get through. And then active transport does require energy because the molecules are moving against the concentration gradient. So one example would be a protein pump, and one of the most common ones that we know of in our body are the sodium-potassium pump. And that's just used to restore appropriate levels of sodium and potassium inside and outside the cell for like action potentials and things like that. And another way is through bulk transport. We have endocytosis, which is when a vesicle forms to take material into the cell. That's going to require energy. And then exocytosis is just the opposite. A vesicle forms to release material from the cell. And so these are just the different ways that the cell membrane is able to control homeostasis within the cell.